Welcome to Election Worker Protection, safeguarding those who safeguard our democracy. I'm Trevor Potter, President of Campaign Legal Center. Thank you all for joining us. CLC is a national, nonpartisan organization working to advance democracy through law at the federal, state, and local levels. We fight for every American's right to participate in the democratic process. We believe our democracy should be transparent, accountable, and inclusive. Everyday Americans run our elections and keep them fair and transparent, and they take this responsibility seriously. In recent years, however, individuals who have spent their careers safeguarding the electoral process are facing unprecedented levels of harassment and are leaving the profession in droves. Election workers and poll workers are friends, neighbors, and co-workers who help keep American democracy safe and secure. These are the unsung heroes on the front lines of our elections. But how do we keep those who safeguard our democracy safe themselves from harm, intimidation, and threats? A 2023 poll by the Brennan Center for Justice reveals a high rate of turnover among election workers, equivalent to approximately 1 or 2 election workers quitting each day since the 2020 election. In response, several states have taken action already to ensure that election workers can safely perform their jobs and continue to securely administer elections. We look forward to discussing these steps in greater depth in today's panel. We brought together an amazing group of experts today to discuss the importance of election workers in safeguarding our democracy. They will walk us through what can be done to retain election workers and institutional knowledge and help us understand what steps lawmakers have taken and need to take, both statewide and nationally, toward protecting election workers. I'd like to introduce Miles Parks, who is a correspondent for NPR's Washington desk, where he covers voting and election security. He began covering election issues after the 2016 presidential election, and his work was cited in the Senate Intelligence Committee's report on Russian election interference. He has also reported extensively on misinformation surrounding COVID-19 and elections. Miles, it's all yours.
Thanks, Trevor. And I'm so excited to be here. The Campaign Legal Center has been a huge resource, I think I can say, for myself and many members of the national and local media. So I appreciate you guys asking me to do this today. Before we start our discussion, just a couple housekeeping notes for people. During the conversation, please use the comment section on Facebook or YouTube to submit your questions for members of the panel. At the end, as we start getting later into the hour, we will get to that Q&A portion. We'll do our best to get to every question. I cannot promise that we will get there because we are trying to knock this out in an hour, but we will do our best. And if you're not able to ask a question today and you're a member of the press, please email your questions to media@campaignlegal.org. And if you're a member of the public and we're not able to get to your question, please email info@campaignlegal.org. And I'll just introduce our panel now. Let's start with Stephen Richer, who is the 30th recorder of Maricopa County in Arizona. He was elected in November 2020 and took office in January 2021. Prior to his election as recorder, Stephen worked as a lawyer and a business person. A recent Wired article profiled Stephen's efforts to combat misinformation, quote, one tweet at a time. I think we are all familiar, and many people in this panel are familiar with Stephen's Twitter account. Stephen has publicly called out social media users who make false claims about elections in Arizona, highlighting the checks and balances that exist in the state and ensure final election results are fair and accurate. And Kelsey Rogers is the senior manager for state advocacy at Campaign Legal Center. In her role, Kelsey works closely with state partners to advance democracy issues and push back against the threat of election sabotage, which we can broadly define as intentional actions to manipulate or change the results of an election so the outcome does not reflect the will of the voters. Before joining CLC, Kelsey spent 7 years at the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, where she helped states across the country pass meaningful gun violence prevention legislation. And we will be also joined in just a couple minutes by Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. We'll introduce her when she joins the panel. But thanks, Stephen and Kelsey, for being here. I'm so excited to talk through some of this stuff with you.
Thanks for having me.
Excited to be here.
So, Stephen, let's start with you. You are the public face of elections in Maricopa County, Arizona. But I do think for people who aren't thinking about elections all the time, maybe they think you're in the room counting millions of ballots yourself, and this is just a process that you are overseeing as the sort of kind of puppet master. Can you kind of dispel with that notion? How many people are involved in making an election happen at the local level, and just kind of talk through the nuts and bolts of actually how elections work?
Yeah, do you remember that scene in Men in Black 2 where Agent K has gone back to the real world and he's working at a post office and he's wondering why everything operates so efficiently and quickly because it's actually aliens with all their different hands? No, unfortunately, that's not the case with me. There are a lot of people who have a hand in election administration. My office has about 150 full-time staff. Now that's across our different verticals of election administration, voter registration, and recording of public documents. But for a general election, such as this upcoming 2024 general election, we will hire 3,000 temporary workers. There will be Republicans, there'll be Democrats, there'll be independents, libertarians who will come on from anywhere from 1 day to 2 months before the elections. They will be doing things like, yes, working at voting locations, which I think is what everyone thinks of, but also doing signature verification at our central facility, ballot processing at our central facility, helping with tabulation, driving box trucks to get all the material to a voting location, working in the warehouse, answering calls at our call center. So there's a myriad of opportunities to get involved, but there's also a lot of people that are needed to make this process run smoothly. And so one of the fictions about sort of any notion of disrupting the system is that this is spread across so many voting jurisdictions in the United States, 8,000 plus. And then each voting jurisdiction, especially large ones like Maricopa County, has thousands of people with different political backgrounds, different economic backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, are working together, overseeing each other and working in their groups to make sure that this process is done. And I view it as my responsibility to make sure that what those people do is understood and that those people can safely go about their jobs. And so we've taken a lot of steps in Maricopa County to shield those people both physically and digitally from as much of the commotion as possible.
Right. I mean, that is why we're here today, right? Is to talk about the fact that this entire people all the way along this kind of election food chain are under threats in a way they were not a few years ago. Kelsey, can you lay out the landscape of what the threat environment that we've seen in 2020 and 2022 looks like, and then also what we're expecting in terms of threats to election officials in 2024?
Absolutely, Miles. Thanks for the question. I mean, folks like Stephen, I think, can speak to the fact that in 2020, the landscape of threats and harassment dramatically escalated, right? So there had certainly been maybe one-off experiences for election officials in the past, but we saw a major effort to scale up threats and harassment, even things like stalking and threats being made to election officials, all the way up and down that chain from folks that are recorders or high-level election administrators all the way down to temporary poll workers who might just be coming in for the day. I think one thing that we saw was really the rise of threats on platforms like Facebook and Twitter. So thinking about how these threats were being experienced by election officials, there was certainly that has been a major pattern. That's something that I think all of us worry going into November. I think there have been ebbs and flows regarding the level of threats since 2020, but already seeing an escalation in that area. I think another thing we saw in 2020 was obviously a lot of that ire and hostility being driven towards election officials in key battleground states, places like Arizona. Since 2020, though, I mean, I've talked to election officials all across the country, Republicans, Democrats, nonpartisan officials in red states, in blue states, in red counties, in blue counties, and really everyone is experiencing this now at a level that I think is unprecedented. I also think that something that we saw in 2020 that I'm particularly keeping a very close eye on is that most of these threats are going to probably come during the post-electoral processes, right? So the canvassing, the counting period, all the way through when the county and state boards will be meeting, even through the audit period. And so, you know, what we might see in 2024 is folks hold off a little bit until they see preliminary results. And then if there is a bad actor who wants to manipulate or undermine those results at that point, I think we'll really see the escalation of those threats into the post-election process as well.
Yeah, if I may, just to give you a sense of some of the lunacy and who some of these threats are directed at. In this last week, we had our presidential preference election in Arizona, and the only thing that was on the ballot was, who do you want the Republican nominee for president of the United States to be, and who do you want the Democratic nominee for the president of the United States to be? We had somebody run into the voting location, and for the most part, people were very, very well behaved. So yay, Arizona on this presidential preference election. But somebody ran into a voting location, said, all of the machines are instruments of fraud, and you all, pointing to all the workers there, the temporary workers, are part of the fraud. And then she started screaming, and then she ran out. And when you think of who was there, the people who were there were equal parts Republican and Democrat. They were probably people who belonged to that community. They were probably people ages 75, 65, 55, generally on average. And there were people who might have been taking that position because they wanted to pick up a few extra bucks, or they were people who were picking up that position because they wanted to help their community. And so I'm not there. My colleagues on the Board of Supervisors aren't there. Secretary of State isn't at that voting location. The governor isn't at that voting location. And so when that person runs in and screams at those people, that's just basically like screaming at your neighbors for something that you're angry about. And so, and yet I can't shield them from that. And so, but that probably, I hope not, but that probably soured their experience that that's done. And so it doesn't change. It doesn't help the conversation. That would have been, you know, if she had emailed that to us or somebody who could made a decision on that. But so that's the type of thing that we see now, and that is saddening, and it is targeted at some people who really, you know, probably couldn't even do much with that.
Well, I would say, you know, obviously this issue of threats toward election workers is very linked to the broader issue of misinformation and disinformation in elections, obviously. You, Stephen, as I mentioned in my introduction to you, have really taken a lead role on social media of trying to take on some of these claims head on. And Maricopa County more broadly has spent an exorbitant amount of resources trying to explain to people how elections work. And you guys put out a 93-page report after 2020, rebutting many of the claims that came up in the audit of Maricopa County's elections. I'm wondering, with all of that effort and energy that you all have taken, is there any sense of whether this is working? How do you define success in terms of rebutting some of these narratives?
So anecdotally, yes. We will have people who will come into our facility and they will walk away and feel like, oh, I feel more confident about the process. I got my questions answered. Similarly with one-to-one email correspondence. Now, if you look at the broad Gallup polls of confidence in election administration in the United States, clearly it hasn't had a sufficient amount of impact because the numbers are pretty similar to what they were in 2021. We don't feel yet, though we've made a Herculean effort, that we are going toe-to-toe with the people who have an incentive to promote bad information. And we firmly believe that there are good faith actors who are still just consuming political information, who would like to know the truth, who aren't predisposed to think poorly of election administrators, but who, for every one piece of good information they get 5 pieces of bad information. And so we think that the elections community, while it has really stepped up, and the news media community and whatnot, I think we're still getting outmatched. And so what we're trying to do here in Maricopa County is just get as much out there as possible. And that's reflected, yes, in my Twitter presence, because if there's something that's picking up traction, we don't want it just sitting out there unchecked. We want to give people our facts, and then hopefully when they see the facts and they see the logical process, they'll say, I, as a rational person, now with both of these easily available, I will choose to believe in the validity of the process. And so that's the thinking behind it. What we'll see. I think that more social scientists are doing some studies of what's effective and how effective is it. But we're going to continue to struggle as long as we have leaders who are so voraciously promoting some of these falsehoods that, logically lead to some people doing some really ugly things in response. Because it doesn't take much imagination to think that if a leader broadcasts to millions of people that one of the greatest crimes against democracy ever is being committed, that at least one of his or her following is going to think, well, gosh, I should do something really extreme to stop them. And we know there have been some people who have done some really extreme stuff.
There are things legislatively that lawmakers can do to try to defend the process. Kelsey, can you talk through some of what we've seen since 2020 at the state level to try to strengthen some of the infrastructure well, people always talk about the incentive structure to try to change whether there are real punishments for people who act in this way, and what we're expecting going forward in that realm?
Of course. Obviously, we really need legislative progress in this area. I think one thing that's fantastic is since 2020, we really saw a flurry of activity, states understanding the urgency that they have to start protecting their election officials. Before 2020, we really only had a handful of states that had any type of real protection for election officials on the books. Most of these laws were also really limited in terms of scope, mostly handled things like in-person election day, prevention of an official from being able to carry out their job responsibilities. So in the aftermath of 2020, now we have over 15 states, which is absolutely incredible, seeing states all across the country start to take up these discussions, see politicians working across the aisle to pass bipartisan bills. Most of these states have passed legislation that does put into effect a criminal penalty for threatening or harassing an election official or imploring another person to do that. Some states have also given election officials the opportunity to avail themselves of prior programs that have been offered to domestic abuse victims or to law enforcement or court officials to be able to keep their confidential information out of public records, which of course would make it easier for a bad actor to be able to take that information and post it online. So something that, I would love as a state advocate to see all 50 states have these laws on the books. That would be the dream. We're going to keep encouraging states to think about both a proactive and a reactive strategy. So again, trying to combine both the criminal penalty pieces as well as allowing election officials to keep that information private from the outset. I would also say to states, talk to your election officials, right? Like, they are all experiencing these threats in their own unique ways. So state to state, we're hearing different things from different officials in terms of, are most of their threats coming in online, many still via email, many via phone call even. So talk to your election officials at that state level, see how you can help them, and don't forget them in the appropriations process either, right? Grants can be offered to states to help ensure, obviously things we never want to think about, but for instance, to put up bulletproof glass in election offices, to ensure that election officials have key card access to certain parts of their office that the public can't get into. So there are really a variety of ways. And we've seen a lot of states take a variety of different paths. And so to all the states out there that maybe haven't taken that step, look at all of the other states, look at the paths that they have already taken, and use that information, talk to your election officials, and move forward with any and all of these paths.
Go ahead, Stephen.
I was going to say, we picked up in Arizona one of those things that Kelsey mentioned. And so we did implement in the last legislative session that election workers can remove or have redacted their information in public records databases. So the same way that we had previously treated law enforcement. So if you were a judge, or if you were a prosecutor, or if you were a police officer, then when you went to record title to your house, you could have the address redacted. And so we extended that in Arizona to people who work in elections, which is a sort of, I mean, it's an indictment of the times, but it was a step forward that the legislature here did take.
Oh, it looks like, hi, Secretary Benson.
Hi, guys.
Welcome.
Thanks. Sorry, my 12 o'clock went really late. Sorry.
No worries at all. It's so exciting to have you. Let me give a quick introduction for you, just so everyone knows who we're talking to. But Jocelyn Benson is Michigan's 43rd Secretary of State. In this role, she's become one of the nation's most prominent leaders in ensuring elections are secure and accessible. Secretary Benson's work overseeing Michigan's 2020 and 2022 general elections, both of which drew record-breaking turnout and were considered more secure than any prior election in state history, earned her national recognition, including the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award and the Presidential Citizens Medal. She also implemented new voting rights for all eligible Michiganders prior to the 2020 election, including the right to vote to absentee, and she oversaw more than 250 audits after the election, all of which affirmed its integrity and accuracy. And let's start with you, Secretary Benson. We were just talking about aspects of responding to the disinformation landscape ahead of 2024. And one of the things I was really curious to get your take on is there are counties big and small in Michigan. And we talked about how Stephen has taken on misinformation in all these different ways in Maricopa County. But as I hear a lot from election officials, big counties have resources. Small counties do not always have the same amount of resources. And I'm wondering what advice you're giving your smaller counties, your under-resourced counties, on how they can respond both to the misinformation environment in 2024 and then the physical threat environment in 2024.
Yeah, that's a great question, because we have 83 counties, and of those, maybe 10 are significantly large with large urban centers, and the vast majority of our counties are rural, including 15 counties in the Upper Peninsula alone that have some major towns in them, but that's pretty much it. And so recognizing that we have, number one, implemented statewide funding sources for every county and have various different calculations for how to provide those resources. So, for example, in 2022 and in 2020, we released $8 million of HAVA funding for security in every locality, because within our 83 counties, we also have 1,500 smaller jurisdictions. And so they have the ability to apply for funds or work with us to get funds. And then in addition to that, on top of that, we provided $30 million through the state to fund early voting. And that both of those things, the $8 billion and the 30 this year, fund both infrastructure, but also fund voter education, because we know that the best way to counter misinformation is to proactively educate citizens about not just their rights, but the procedures and all the security pieces of the process, so that people don't have a blank slate for which to absorb the misinformation when it hits. But that said, with our rural townships in particular, our clerks who are inundated with FOIA requests and just numerous requests, duplicative, almost harassing requests for the same information, we tried to provide legal support and other types of advice to help them respond to those requests, and also recognize the duplicative nature of a lot of the let's say, harassment and the requests for information sometimes enables us to say, well, this is how the 15 other townships that received this request handled it. And you have that in some way strengthen numbers. And then the final thing we've done in terms of responding to misinformation, in addition to providing that funding and statewide support, is set up a voter confidence council statewide with 10 different local councils, some of which cover those rural parts of the state in northern Michigan. And these involve business leaders and sports leaders and academic leaders in these jurisdictions, and equip them with information about how we ensure the accuracy of our voter rolls, for example. So they can, as leaders in their local jurisdiction, provide that information. Mayors as well and township supervisors we're also equipping with that information, because they're often hit with it and they can sometimes respond. So our voter confidence councils have been ways for us to empower trusted messengers in those local communities to respond to information in the local level. And I think the bottom line is local response is important, and empowering local figures to be that response helps us protect the voters in even rural jurisdictions.
Yeah, it does feel like there's kind of a two-tier response to misinformation in terms of trying to kind of front load people with correct information and then doing things on the back end to change the incentive structure. And in that realm, I'm curious, Stephen, you're currently suing a losing candidate in 2022 for defamation related to claims that she made about that election. I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about why you thought it was important to take that step, and talk us through where we're at in that process right now?
Yeah, I guess because ran out of options. It's like, well, we provided the accurate information. We discredited this theory. You lost in court, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. And how else do we make this go away? Ideally, we would have such an uproar from professionals and business leaders and political leaders that we would say, knock it off. This is nonsense. You're damaging all of American government, and you need to learn how to lose, and you need to get a new job. But that didn't happen. And unfortunately, still in some circles, this is a path to success. And so this is the first time, and hopefully the last time I ever sue somebody in my individual capacity. But I think that I, as well as the election workers in Georgia, were at our wits' end with how do we make this go away? And we're afforded the same legal protections that anyone is afforded. And I'm thrilled that they got the rulings that they did. And so far, because all the facts and all the law are on my side, we've gotten the rulings that we've wanted. And just yesterday, she accepted liability, which is a big stinking deal. That the gubernatorial candidate for Arizona in 2022 has just acknowledged in a court of law that she lied about me. She lied about the 2022 election process. Now, I'm not operating under any delusions that will all of a sudden lift the veil of all of her followers, but hopefully it'll start to crack, and hopefully there will be some pause before other people do that, and hopefully this will allow me to begin sort of the repairing of everything that was said about me. And so that's the hope behind it. But I mean, what a shame it would be if we now have to tell every single, what Jocelyn said, she had 83 counties.
Mm-hmm.
83 counties. You see, Jocelyn has to go around and say, you got to get ready to file, a defamation suit when they just won't stop saying crazy things about you. And so I would like to make it antisocial before I would like to litigate it into oblivion. But I think a few of these will have to litigate into oblivion, and they've been very successful so far.
Can you guys talk a little bit about kind of what you touched on there, Stephen, in terms of there's been a lot of data, and I've reported on some of it, about how some local election officials are just saying, I don't want to do this anymore because of the threat landscape and the polarized environment around voting right now, that there have been a number of retirements and people leaving the field. Have you, Jocelyn, seen that in Michigan? And Stephen, what are you hearing from other local election officials in Arizona? Jocelyn, you can start.
Well, I think we have. I know that we have a lot more election officials than many other states, than Arizona and Nevada in particular. And so, in some ways, the decentralized nature of our elections in Michigan enable us to withstand some turnover, and that's on somewhat regularity. So I'll say that yes, there's been some turnover. In particular, Tina Barton, who stood up to her own party in Rochester, Michigan, she left shortly after 2020, and a number of others have as well. But the bigger story for us in Michigan has been the number of people who've stepped up and joined the ranks out of a desire to communicate through our actions that we're not going to allow fear to prevent us from defending democracy. And so what I've seen more than anything in Michigan is more people sign up than who have left. And in some way emboldened by the challenges we've experienced to continue to do this work. For example, we've had over 80,000 individuals from all 83 counties sign up to be election workers since 2020. And 50,000 of those signed up after 2020. So this is really an unprecedented time to be doing this work. But a lot of us look at this critical moment that we're facing and want to do more. And you see clerks at our county level, like Justin Roebuck, who's a Republican clerk on the west side of the state, and Kathy Garrett, who's a clerk of our largest county in Wayne County, doing more. And many others are doing this too, doing more than ever before to provide transparency, to educate voters, and to expand our team pushing back at these challenges, because we know it's at stake. And I feel it's an honor to be able to do this work. And I think a lot of our local election officials feel the same.
You have anything you want to add, Stephen? Yeah.
We're maybe the new AmeriCorps. So I agree with everything that Jocelyn said. You know, we have seen a lot of turnover in Arizona. There are 15 MEs, 15 recorders for the 15 counties. And I have been in office for just under 4 years, and I'm already, I think, fourth most senior of the 15. And there's a 5-member board of supervisors in here in Maricopa County that I share some responsibilities with, and they're also involved in elections. And when I took office, there were 4 Republicans and 1 Democrat. Of those original 4 Republicans, 1 resigned, 2 have said they are not running for re-election. And so, yeah, it's real. But we have actually, everyone always asks, okay, is it hard recruiting temporary workers? Yes, of course, because it's a logistics puzzle and challenge, and inflation is real. And so people care about what they're being paid and all that stuff. But I agree with what Jocelyn said. There's certainly more enthusiasm, more awareness. And so that's component of it is exciting. And I hope that that this is a new generation of elections enthusiasts of whatever age enters into the space, because they see that this process is something that needs support, and they want to support it.
You touched on this a little bit, Kelsey, in terms of, and we've heard a lot in this conversation about different things that do cost money when it comes to elections. And I wonder, can you talk a little bit about the landscape around, obviously, elections are more scrutinized right now, maybe than ever before, with the potential of 2000 maybe being a close second, I would say. Has across the country, have states allocated a lot more money towards elections, or has that been kind of a struggle to get states to give more funding to respond to all the additional scrutiny and all the different additional requirements that we know election officials are under right now?
I think it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, right? I think that there are sometimes states where we're pushing and asking for them to do more. As Secretary Benson noted up top, in her first response, thinking about Michigan and all of the funds that they have allotted for their counties to be able to effectively run elections. It's been really heartening to see a lot of states understand now that due to how decentralized the nature of administering elections is, that we have to think more critically about what do our election officials need on a daily basis, right? This is why I raised appropriations in my answer in terms of what can we do. It's not just about passing bills, it's about listening to what the officials need on the ground. It's obviously something that we have pushed very hard for at CLC. And I think when it comes to what election officials do need, it is, a combination of different pieces. And so thinking about what does that security look like for them in election offices, that has been one of the main focuses that we've taken on the appropriations front. I'm sure my amazing co-panelists can speak a little bit more about the other costs that are needed to administer elections, but that's mostly what we've been honing in on.
Do you guys want to jump in on that, Jocelyn or Stephen?
On election costs? Yeah, I mean, you mean on the cost of elections?
Exactly, yeah.
It's sort of twofold. One, the cost of running elections has increased exponentially over the last several years in Michigan in particular, because we have implemented a number of new policies to expand access to the vote, from automatic voter registration to no reason absentee voting to 9 days of in-person early voting, so that the actual infrastructure is more expensive. But as a result of the lies and misinformation, we've got to do more than ever before to educate citizens proactively, to develop innovative ways to do that education, and to respond to the threats that come from the misinformation, like putting bulletproof glass in our election worker offices to protect our staff from the angry people who come in, incensed over these lies that they're hearing. So all of that has caused for an increase in the cost of running elections. And then the second piece is there has been this politicization of funding elections. It feels like that is nonsensical to me, because every single person who is in public service should want fair, free, secure, and fully funded elections. And the fact that it's consistently a struggle that falls along partisan lines to simply just get funding for our elections from the federal government is mind-boggling. And even to build consensus among my colleagues, other secretaries, who also seem to be towing on certain sides of the party line, that's been really disheartening, because it only helps us reduce errors and increase the security of our processes and the people in those processes when we have funding for our elections. And so my hope is we're going to keep calling for it, and eventually I think that will hopefully turn the tide. I was glad to see some money in the federal budget this year, but it is a perennial concern and need and request from us.
Yeah, I often hear something like a response to Jocelyn: do you really need that bulletproof glass? Do you really need that? Do you need that lining and whatnot? And, setting aside, I would always defer to the security professionals on that. But if we do not take steps, so here in Maricopa County, putting a security guard inside of the central facility, if we do not take steps to show that to the people who work in this process, temporary workers or full-time workers, that we have your backs and we will do everything within our power to make sure that your commitment to this process is backed up by our commitment to you, then we will lose workers. And so while maybe that bulletproof glass will never be tested, and I pray that it's not, just knowing that it's there might be like, okay, I feel more comfortable working here. And I know that Secretary Benson means it when she says, I've got your back. You're going to be safe. We're going to take care of you. Thank you for working this process. And so I try to bundle that with, it's not just about, stopping the threat, but it's also about securing the mind of the voter and the worker.
I remember back to a conversation, Secretary Benson, that we had before, I think the 2022 election, where we were talking about kind of what election officials have learned since 2020 and what changes have been made. And something you said that stuck with me was how much closer you all were working with law enforcement and partnering with law enforcement. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that ahead of 2024, about how election officials can work with law enforcement ahead of this election more than maybe they would have pre-2020.
It's gotten easier every year. I mean, in 2020 that's when we really first began building these relationships and building trust between election officials and local law enforcement in each community, and building the fabric of that trust that enables us to proactively deter, but also rapidly respond to issues that arise. And as we've worked with the prosecutorial community, as well as the law enforcement community, sheriffs, and police chiefs and the like, every year it's gotten easier. Having a friendly attorney general in our state and a justice department as well, now nationwide, on our helping with those relationships, has only made it easier. And now, as we enter 2024, we have monthly conversations with the Michigan State Police, with local law enforcement in our largest jurisdictions, as well as local prosecutors and statewide attorney general leaders, all of which make up our election security council. And that has been great. And it's also been great to see that replicated in Pennsylvania and in other states too, because we're facing, in some ways, common challenges. So it's every year those relationships build in strength, but we really did start from nothing back in 20, where there was no history, at least in Michigan, of our election community and our law enforcement community working together. And I'll underscore all that by saying what it's helped us do leading into this cycle, I think, is provide more of a united message of deterrence, especially as we've passed laws to make it a crime to threaten election officials, for example. That has enabled more continuity, so that we're presenting a united front to those who might try to interfere with our processes. And my hope, at least we saw this in 22, is that provides a deterrent effect for those who might be looking to play games or disrupt our elections.
Stephen, have you guys partnered with law enforcement or worked to prepare for 2024 as well?
Yeah, they've been awesome. Sheriff's office has been awesome. Local police departments, fantastic. Arizona Department of Homeland Security, FBI. The one that wasn't was the Arizona Attorney General, and now the Arizona Attorney General is very supportive. The previous one did not have our back, and quite the opposite. Politics. But I can't say enough about the sheriff's office, and but we're taking them away from other stuff that they were doing. Is these guys were not just hanging out and at a picnic if we hadn't had these elections. And so just there is no law enforcement office in the country that's like, recruitment is so easy. We have every spot full, and this is great. So we're taking already stretched thin departments, and we're saying, you've got to commit many people to this process, which, by the way, is a month-long process. And that means they're not doing other stuff that I don't have great insight to, but I know is important for the community. And that's sad, but they have not wavered in their commitment to us. And I have great pity and empathy for any election official who does not have a supportive, whatever your local law enforcement group is. That would make life so much harder.
Do you all have a sense of, obviously it seems like the former president is going to continue pushing his claims about the 2020 election, just judging by his recent remarks in the last couple of weeks. But I wonder about the results in 2022, especially at the Secretary of State race level, were pretty resounding in voters in many battleground states kind of rejecting candidates who pushed a lot of the narratives around the 2020 election. Do you think that candidates down ballot are looking at that and may be more hesitant in 2024 to push some of that stuff? Or do you think that has not been enough kind of political repercussions to affect whether people are willing to engage in that sort of behavior?
There have been gains. Stephen, did you want to take it?
No, go.
I was going to say two things. One, there have been gains in other states. We now have to watch our back at the Secretary of State level among our colleagues in states like Florida and Texas and Alabama, states where previously we would have collaborated and coordinated with secretaries, particularly Republican secretaries, and where we did in the past collaborate and coordinate. Now we don't have allies there, and in some cases we have people repeating misinformation about us, which is really tough. So yes, there have been in battleground states at the candidate level in 2022, that voters rejected election conspiracy theorists from running. But in other states, in some primaries, sitting Republican secretaries were ousted and replaced by election denier secretaries of state. And so that's a real challenge that we have to deal with that we didn't deal with in 20. And the other piece of it that we're just starting to see is that we've not, the potency of the takeover of the RNC. We're just starting to see what that's going to be like. And I think it's going to be really challenging for us to do our jobs effectively with them trying to interfere with all of our work in the battlegrounds every step of the way. And we're already seeing some signs of that in a way. So I think in some ways, yes, voters have resoundingly rejected this dishonesty that's rooted in election denialism, but we are still seeing it emerge and have take root in different pockets of our political ecosystem. And so we should be grateful that in some cases it's been rejected, certainly, but we also need to be very clear-eyed that it's going to be, I think, stronger, more sophisticated, and more organized as of a contingent than we dealt with in 20. And it will deal with it throughout this cycle.
I think tangentially as well, something that I know all have been thinking a lot about is the rise of AI tools, right? And how AI is going to make it even easier for bad actors who are looking to undermine the system already to be able to do that. Right now, there are programs that allow you to manipulate a picture that might make it look like a reporter or an election worker is tampering with ballots, and that in fact never happened. So we need to think, I think, critically as well in terms of how AI and the election denialism movement and how all of those things come together on platforms like Twitter and can grow very quickly and spread even further conspiracy theories. Obviously, this has a huge impact on how the average American views and is confident in our elections, but also, is another avenue by which our election officials are potentially going to be receiving even more threats and harassment.
On the elections question, or on the candidates question, yeah, I think that was the top line. You looked at places like Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, Michigan. Jocelyn mopped the floor with that Kristen person and whatnot, and so they lost. But most people don't face a competitive general election, and then that's something we need to keep in mind. There are a lot of districts at the congressional level, the state legislative level, where you never have to speak if you don't want to a voter from the other party. You win the primary, and then you're a shoe-in for the general election. And so, it's not a deterrent to those folks. And then, I know here in Arizona, it hasn't faded. I will be a scientific experiment for your hypothesis, Miles. I will be running in a partisan primary. My thoughts on the 2020 election are well known at this point. My opponent's thoughts are different. And so, it's still very much a feature of the political context in the political debate here in Arizona, at least.
Okay, I think we can move now to Q&A. I think we've got a few questions from folks. If you guys want to pull up some, here we go, from Caitlin Malone. Kelsey, can you throw an example of a state that has recently passed a particularly good election worker privacy statute?
Well, I have an amazing co-panelist here that can speak to her state. Michigan and Nevada both over the past year, I would say both of those states have really been prime examples of states that have understood the urgency, understood the assignment. They have really passed strong, comprehensive laws that have taken into account what election officials need and have asked for. And it's been really heartening to see the work that they have done also really start to spread across the country. It's amazing as someone who works in a variety of different states to be able to point to states and to say, look at the strong examples that have already been left for you here, and feel free to work this language, take this language, see how you can adapt it in your state.
Okay, next question. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Jocelyn?
I'm grateful for our lawmakers for passing these laws. I'll say they have a specific, I underestimated how much it would mean to our local election officials. I mean, we from day one of this legislative session, we said we need to protect the people who protect democracy. That was our highest priority going into the cycle coming out of 2022. And as we pass those laws, the number one thing I hear now from our local clerks is thank you, and saying how much safer they feel as a result of those laws. And so I think and hope other states follow suit, because it really sends a strong message in additional providing those additional protections to the folks who we need to feel comfortable and safe in the jobs that they do this year.
Great. Okay, next question, guys. All right, I work in voter protection in Texas, and we have significant attrition rates at both the volunteer and paid staff level for election workers due to threats of criminal prosecution for mistakes. Do you have recommendations for making workers more comfortable and confident when we have an AG, Ken Paxton, that constantly tests and advertises his power to jail workers? And I know we've seen this in a number of states. Lawmakers pass rules that criminalize or further penalties for local election workers. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I mean, that's really sad, and I don't know the landscape of the laws in Texas, but if there were such a law in Arizona, we would say, look, do your best job possible, follow the law as faithfully as you can. If you have a question, ask your supervisor. Please ask your supervisor. And if you do everything in good faith, then I promise that this office will defend you to the greatest extent possible. And I and the rest of the leadership staff will try to shield you as much as possible. I just like that's a nightmare for poll worker recruitment, that type of situation. If they prosecuted somebody for making a ministerial mistake, yeah, and then didn't hold the elected official accountable or something like that. I have big sort of general criminal law problems with no intent or no mens rea in there. So I guess I would just say have your back, train as much, invest more in training such that the poll worker can feel confident in what he or she is doing. And then always have somebody with you, just always be doing things. And this is sort of how elections are set up, always be doing things in groups, always be doing things in bipartisan thing, always be doing things under camera, such that if anyone alleges something, it would be like, you know what, Sally was right next to me. And like, I wasn't doing that. We were doing it together. And like, we were doing exactly how we were told to do. And so, I'm sorry that that's a situation.
I'll add, I have 3 pieces of advice. One, to sort of underscore what Stephen would say, transparency is your friend. Never forget when the truth and the facts are on your side, no matter what the adversaries may be or who they may be or how much power they have. When you have the truth and facts on your side, transparency is your friend. And secondly, related to that, don't allow those bullying tactics to deter you or anyone else from doing this work. And find allies elsewhere, where if you don't have an attorney general who's an ally, and many are not, you can go to the federal government. The DOJ certainly even just can help with advice and speaking to folks ahead of time so that they can get involved if there's any potential need to or ability to. And then third, I mean, I don't want to be cheeky, but I'm just going to be cheeky and say it sounds like you need a new AG. If an AG is not going to protect you, and local prosecutors, like I know I don't want to be political in this nonpartisan conversation, but our protections in a democracy are rooted in people and the law. And when the people who enforce the law are not protecting the people who need protection, then sometimes there needs to be someone else in that position.
Jocelyn and I also are part of a group that's the Election Official Legal Defense Network. And I believe that there's States United does some of this as well, States United for Democracy. But if you are an election worker and for whatever reason your office or state or county or whatever it is isn't stepping up to defend you, there are some pro bono legal opportunities out there. The one that I'm most familiar with is that Election Legal Defense Network. And so don't feel like you're by yourself, and reach out to people in the elections community, and you'll find hopefully some resources.
Yeah, it's a good point. Since 2020, I mean, that's kind of one of the silver linings, I guess, is that there have been a lot of groups, partnerships that have popped up to kind of fill some of these voids. All right, I think we've got time for one last question, if you guys want to pop it up. One thing we've been seeing are increased concerns about the use of AI to supercharge threats to election officials, to sow misinformation about elections, and to even fabricate audio and video about the actions of election officials. AI wasn't really around in 2020 and 2022, at least publicly. So this is new. Is there anything being done to address this? I feel like, Kelsey, you talked about this a little bit. Stephen and Jocelyn, if you want to jump in on how you're thinking about AI in elections in 2024, are you guys doing anything in your offices to prepare, or what are you thinking about?
Yeah, in Michigan, we have enacted laws to both ban the intentional deceptive use of artificial intelligence to impersonate or otherwise try to deceive people around election issues or political issues. So that's a new law. It will require some enforcement and testing, but certainly that having that in place, along with the requirement that any artificial intelligence generated media be disclosed and have a disclaimer. Those are the sort of initial steps that we needed to take in order to have some tools in the law to protect citizens against the malicious use of AI. But we certainly anticipate it will be used, and we're partnering with prosecutors and law enforcement to make sure those laws that we have at the state provide protections. And then secondly, through the voter confidence councils I mentioned earlier, we're equipping citizens and leaders with the ability to be critical consumers of information and to know what to do if they see something that or hear something that they think might be AI, how to validate it, who to turn to, how to report it. And so all of that has been building the legal infrastructure and then equipping people to use those protections has been our work. But it's hard to know when you're facing a tsunami if the wall that you've built is sufficient. We hope that it is, but it's ultimately going to require all of us to be critical consumers of information and reject artificial intelligence or other types of misinformation. And it's up to us as election officials to give people all the tools they need to be able to do that.
I don't have any great sophistication. I know this is very much a thing. I know that there are groups talking about it. I know that our IT professionals are thinking about it more. The one thing I will say, that's like a yay, is that there are lots of jurisdictions. There are lots of elections jurisdictions, and so sometimes that's frustrating because you're like, why are you guys not doing it the same way as Pennsylvania, or why do your processes not look the same as Oregon's? And that's frustrating. But one of the benefits of that is hey, maybe Oregon will come up with something really clever as far as how to combat the inappropriate use of AI. I don't know yet. It hasn't punched us in the nose yet here. Hopefully it won't. We're taking steps to ensure it won't. But I don't think we've seen the full beast unleashed yet. The sort of the most pernicious thing that I'm aware of so far was that fake robocall from President Biden, telling people to vote on Wednesday or something instead of Tuesday. So for that, we would treat it just like any other disinformation and be like, hey, this wasn't President Biden. This is false information. You should go to your elections website, and elections are still on Tuesday, as they've been for a long time now. And so that, it will be challenging.
And I'll just add one thing that Arizona's done that we are replicating in Michigan are tabletop exercises, or just sort of practice sessions with local officials so that we can know how to rapidly respond to the example like Stephen gave and how we need to know to get information out. So we are doing work as officials to be prepared. But as Stephen emphasized, it's new. And so we're still learning about the depths through which people will go and use it to deceive our voters.
Okay, well, I think we can leave it there, guys. I'm going to give you each a little bit of time for final thoughts on this, on 2024 and protecting election workers, things that we should be thinking about. Stephen, do you have any final thoughts?
Hang in there. We're going to be great. We're going to get through 2024, I have full confidence that each jurisdiction in each state, when push comes to shove, there might be some bumps along the road, but we are going to have an election, a good election, and I hope that as many Americans as possible will make me proud, and try not to miss the fact that 99.99% of Americans are going to behave properly when they show up to vote. And yeah, there might be some, but don't lose sight of the fact that the broader. And then I would say, so support your local election administrators. Just even like a thank you at a voting location, just because they get to hear some of the other side, and so that might bolster them as they continue on in this process and be like, you know what, this is appreciated. I'm coming back for more. So that would be appreciated by me. Thank you.
I think the bottom line is that in 2020, democracy prevailed because people of integrity on both sides of the aisle stood guard, did their jobs, and did them well, and didn't allow the lies and the misinformation and the threats to interfere with our duty to ensure that no matter who wins an election, voters choose and elect our candidates and choose the winner, and that winner is able to take office. We protected the accurate results of the 2020 election proudly. We did it again in 2022 against even those running within to try to dismantle our processes, and we'll do it again in 2024. But it is going to take all of us more than ever before to recognize the difference between the truth and the lies. And really, in every action we take this year, think about what we want to do in this moment to define who we are as a country and a democracy moving forward. I believe that what we've seen over the last few years is democracy become stronger as a result of what we've endured. And so my hope is coming out of this cycle, we will have a stronger and more robust and healthier democracy than ever before. But whether we get there or not will depend on the actions every citizen, including those watching today, takes to be a part of the process, to spread truthful information, to respond to lies and reject the misinformation that's coming our way, call out the bad actors, and refuse to support those who are spreading this misinformation and threatening election workers, and instead stand with us. Become an election worker in your state or an election observer and tell the story about how secure our elections actually are, so that when the challenges come our way after an election by anyone who's unhappy with the results, we can collectively stand together and say, no, the results are accurate, and ensure that the will of the people again rules the day.
It's a tough act to come after these two. I mean, first, honestly, what an honor to have, a chance to speak on this really timely, very important issue next to my two incredible co-panelists. I will also just end on a note of optimism and say, as someone who is working across the states and who is talking to lawmakers and election officials every day, it is really heartening to me to see how many folks know that this is a really important issue and to see all the action being taken on it. It's a great reminder that we can come together across political aisles, even on an issue that can sometimes feel very partisan, right? We know that protecting election officials, administering safe, secure elections is nonpartisan. And so being able to be part of those efforts has been incredible. I see it as an incredibly positive note and step for our democracy that we are taking these actions to help protect our election officials. Our officials deserve a safe and secure working environment as they administer these elections, and those who are helping and helping others access the ballot box do as well, right? Everyone deserves a democracy that is free from intimidation and interference, and so getting to work on these has been incredibly heartening to me.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks to all three of our panelists, and thanks to everyone who watched today. If you have other questions or want more information about anything we talked about, please reach out to the Campaign Legal Center at info@campaignlegalcenter.org. Thanks again for being here, and have a great day.
Thanks, Miles.
Guys.